to the 532nd episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Welcome, and thanks for listening. I have a couple studies today. We're going to do some cardiology. Statins, cholesterol medications statins are the most common cholesterol medications. They've been around since the late 1980s, early 1990s. They've evolved. There's multiple ones. There's some popular. There's different mechanisms of action a little bit. Some like more water soluble, some are more fat soluble, but the mechanism is pretty much the same. And the side effect profile is mostly the same as well. People can have muscle aches. They can have liver abnormalities. There's an increased risk in adult onset diabetes. And sometimes people just can't get their cholesterol down to where their physicians would like them to. So there are other agents that can be added on. The other thing that's new with statins, or kind of newly determined, is that statins might actually increase that Lp(a) instead of decrease it, which is not what you want to do. So people that have an increased Lp(a), statins might not be their best choice. And again, those people tend to have higher cholesterol, cardiovascular disease in early age, more inflammation, so they're more at risk. And so there's a medication that came out in 2017 called Repatha, and it is a PCSK8 inhibitor, which means that it inhibits the breakdown LDL receptors, bad cholesterol receptors, so that LDL can actually be cleared from the bloodstream quicker. And this has resulted in very, very low cholesterol numbers. So it's not common for people to achieve cholesterols of 90 to 100, and everybody gets excited about that. But the question is, how low do we want people's cholesterol to actually go, and how safe is it for them to actually go? And is there truly a benefit? In 2017, there was a study published, the 4A study in the New England Journal of Medicine, that said that Repatha decreased cardiovascular mortality in this high-risk age group versus placebo. Most recently, a study came out in the British Journal of Preventive Cardiology that went over the results and found some discrepancies. And today, I'd like to go over the discrepancies. They used an independent group of people that basically reworked the math and went back and looked at the patients that had an adverse outcome, that had cardiovascular death, that had death from all causes. And they looked to see whether or not, if everything was basically labeled as they should be labeled. And some interesting results, to say the least. The mortality data in the primary results, they actually end up comparing to what they actually got. So this was an independent committee, not paid for by anyone, and they were blinded to the previous results. So they just went back and went through them and dug up the hospital records and really defined, if people had an adverse event, what they died of, so forth. They found that 360 out of the 870 deaths, 41.4%, the cause was different from the original documented cause. There were 11 more deaths from myocardial infarction in the Repatha group, so in the treatment arm, 36 versus 25. There were 3 less in the placebo group, the people that didn't get anything, 27 versus 30. The congestive heart failure episodes were twice that of the placebo, 31 versus 16. Again, it was an abnormal finding. Cardiovascular and vascular deaths were not independently assessed in the original trial. When they went ahead and looked at things more closely, there were 113 cardiovascular deaths in the Repatha group versus 88 deaths in the placebo group. This was a non-statistically significant number, but nevertheless, it was more. Non-cardiovascular deaths were 37. In the New England Journal of Medicine, they reported a decrease in non-fatal MIs and strokes. when that was looked at again, did not hold up. Both the total and cardiovascular mortality was actually higher, and the cardiovascular deaths were higher than reported in the original study. So that leaves me as a cardiologist in somewhat a quandary. So we have a medication that was basically approved after the study and is used widely, and it's used in very high-risk populations, people that can't take statins or aren't achieving cholesterols that they should or have had recurrent events. And now we have these results that are raising some pretty big red flags as to whether or not these are entirely accurate. When they went back and they looked at some of the deaths, they didn't report that they were actually sudden cardiac deaths. So it raises the question, could this be associated with an increased risk of arrhythmias? On the other hand, we still don't know whether the people that had these adverse outcomes were they people that were perhaps higher risk than the placebo group. Did they have arrhythmias? So none of the data is necessarily completely teased out, but just that the overall results and this, the total population that was studied doesn't look that good. So again, there's a lot that we don't know, but I've always worried about lowering the cholesterol to such a very, very low number. There's a lot of questions raised, is cholesterol really a problem with vascular disease? Or perhaps it's a red herring that when people have cardiovascular disease, then they can no longer clear cholesterol. So perhaps its cause is not as much as an incident effect. We certainly know that people with very, very high cholesterols have increased plaque, increased vascular events. So, greater than 400 or 500, the risk is certainly increased. We know that in native populations, a cholesterol of 150, there's actually a low incidence of cardiovascular disease. So we know that if you don't take any medications and your cholesterol naturally is 150, probably in pretty good shape. We know that most children and teenagers are cholesterols in that 130 to 150, 140 range. So we know that that's kind of a normal number. People talk about, well, my doctor says I just make too much cholesterol. Well, most likely you don't make too much cholesterol. We don't make more cholesterol as we age. We don't do anything more as we age. So it's probably a matter of more likely we don't clear cholesterol from our system as much as we did when we were younger. And we've accumulated in our tissues. The liver has to clear a lot of things. How much its effectiveness starts to wane over the years. We don't run as fast as we did, and our livers probably don't run as fast as they did as well. So it's more of a accumulation and a decreased clearance than it is a decreased production. Nevertheless, cholesterol is vital in a lot of processes. When we go out in the sun, which I am a very avid proponent of, the sun interacts with our skin and cholesterol to actually activate vitamin D. Cholesterol is used to make sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So we need cholesterol. It's used to make membranes in the brain. So there is a use. It's not, one of those chemicals that we don't know what it's for, but it causes problems and we should get rid of it all. It certainly is needed. And to me, if our body made a cholesterol that we ran a level at about 140 or 150 as a child or an young adult, then why wouldn't that be the lower limit that we want to drive our cholesterol down? So if healthy young people can survive at a cholesterol of 150, obviously adults should be able to tolerate 150. But can they tolerate 90 over time? I don't know. And certainly the study would make me be worried that maybe this lowering of cholesterol is actually too low and causing a problem. We certainly had other medication that seemed to do the right thing as far as increasing HDL or increasing good cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and that resulted in more heart attacks. It made people clot. So a lot of times when a study looks at a metric, a number, lower the cholesterol to this, lower the blood pressure to this, that's all well and good. But I would rather be alive with a high cholesterol than dead with a very low cholesterol, if you know what I mean. So I think this is going to raise, I hope that there is open debate about this study. It just came out. If you're on this medication, I am not giving you medical advice, but it would be something to talk to your doctor about, perhaps. Um, again, my practice is very much geared at lowering cholesterol the old-fashioned way through nutrition, plant-based nutrition, and exercise. And I think if you live that lifestyle, most people can get a cholesterol that's safe, and you're not oxidizing cholesterol. Therefore, you may have uh, you may have some shotguns in the closet, but if there are no bullets, then we don't have to worry about them going off. So, and that's kind of the way with cholesterol. We may have an Lp(a) abnormality. We may have cholesterol that's over 150 in some people. But if we're eating a diet that is very low and as far as oxidative stress, low in inflammation, diabetes is controlled, then we should just be fine. So that is really, again, what we try to do in our practice. Do we give people options? Absolutely. We work with people, and ultimately it is my job to educate people, and it is their job to decide what they want. And again, in this podcast, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just reporting things that have raised suspicion for me and have made me question some things. So take it as a grain of salt, but I think it's an important thing to think about. Some people ask me, and actually I got asked this week, if your hemoglobin A1C is 5.7, 5.8, are you now no longer at risk for cardiovascular disease? And the answer is no. The reality of it is that starts to fall in the pre-diabetes range. So 5.5 to 5.7, 6.4. That's a gray zone. That's pre-diabetes range. And the question is, how can we not progress to diabetes in that population? But also, given the fact that their risk for cardiovascular disease and all the side effects of diabetes are still present, how can we perhaps screen for people earlier and change things around? And what should we look for? And what do these people have in common with people that are already diabetic? So there was a study done that looked at 9 measurements. And they actually looked at pre-diabetics and diabetics, and they looked for what was overlapping. And then they looked for what was unique to pre-diabetics. And they looked at things like grip strength and EKGs and ultrasounds and retinal eye tests and DEXA scans and treadmill tests and lung functions, MRIs, blood tests, height, weight, body mass index, hip to weight ratio. And they looked at the people specifically that had normal body mass index. And what made these people at risk for diabetic? Why were somebody pre-diabetic that had a normal body mass index? And this has always been a quandary, because in adult onset diabetes, we see people that are mainly overweight. They tend to carry their weight in the middle, so they tend to have a larger waist than hip. So they've increased waist to hip ratio, but they, again, tend to be adult onset diabetic patients tend to be overweight. And we treat it by decreasing the fat in the diet so that we can unblock the receptor for glucose. And we treat by decreasing the fat in the body, fat in the viscera, fat in the liver. And that will help to reverse diabetes and get people off of medication. But there is a population that have a normal body mass index that still are pre-diabetics. And the question is, what makes these people at risk for diabetics? What makes them pre-diabetic? And how do we keep them from becoming full-blown diabetics? So these risk factors were overlooked for all these different people. Looked at insulin resistance. They looked at pancreatic function with insulin levels, with C-peptide levels, fasting glucose levels. And again, there were 12 variables that overlapped, but there are some independents. And one of the ones that stood out to be the biggest risk factor for someone that has a normal body mass index that is pre-diabetic is elevated triglycerides. And it is associated with, again, an increased risk of mortality independently, and increased risk of diabetes. What causes people to have increased triglycerides that are normal body weight? We tend to think that when people are normal body weight, that they're eating a pretty healthy diet. That's not always true. Some people, older people would call it the tea and toast diet, or, I had a friend of family that she, liked donuts and coffee, but she portioned them out just right. So she stayed thin. So she was, somebody that ate sweets all day long. She actually wasn't a diabetic, but nevertheless, that's kind of what she lived on. And there are other people that have, despite being normal body mass index, tend to have more visceral fat. So by a DEXA scan, you can tell that they carry a lot of fat or more fat around their organs and within the organs, specifically perhaps the liver, which is a form of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So even normal weight people can have that. And increased waist to hip ratio. And they tended to have be a little bit older as well. So when you think about older, you think about decreased muscle mass, decreased mitochondrial function. Other things that could increase triglycerides besides diet could be, physical inactivity. So people that don't do much, so you sit around, you eat a poor diet. Thyroid disease also will contribute to high triglycerides. Kidney disorders can contribute to high triglycerides. Beta blocker therapy for your blood pressure can contribute to high triglycerides. Steroids or any other immunosuppressive medications can contribute to high triglycerides and thus an increased risk of adult onset diabetes. So when it kind of all goes back to the basics. Back again, physical activity and nutrition, plant-based nutrition, eating a low-fat diet. It is amazing what we can see with glucose improvements just taking nuts and a few chips here and there out of people's diet. Your friends tell you you just have a few, or I only do this once in a while, or I had a handful of nuts in the evening, or, things kind of progress over time for the most people. You get a little bit more lax. They start to creep into the diet a little bit more, but susceptible individuals just can't tolerate it. Just like, it's not an allergy, but it is kind of like an allergy if that causes a problem. And so nuts are 85% fat, and they can really cause a problem in people that are susceptible. The other thing is muscle mass, and that comes from sedentary lifestyle. So, people may have not exercised over the years, and they've lost muscle mass. They manage to maintain their body mass index, so their weight is a good range because they limit their, some people are very good at limiting their caloric intakes. So they appear thin, but they're not healthy. If they were younger, people will call them skinny fat because they're thin, but they're not necessarily healthy. So that is a population in and of itself that's at risk for diabetes, and the same thing applies. Strength training, walking, vigorous activity to increase muscle mass, increase mitochondrial function. Sunlight exposure helps to decrease inflammation in the body and improve metabolic pathways, improve mitochondrial function, and obviously plant-based nutrition. So it's not, and sometimes it can be even more difficult to improve the hemoglobin A1C in these people because, again, they don't eat that much. And they're on the thin side. So we have to be very careful because we don't want them to get skinnier because they might actually, we don't want them to lose any more muscle mass, or we don't want people to lose bone mass. And if these people were to do a ketogenic diet, they probably would lose more muscle mass. So that would be a risk factor. So we really work, and I really have these people work with our registered dietitian, Addie. And we really work to get these people active and strength trained and moving so that they can normalize their glucose and their hemoglobin A1Cs. The World Health Organization, speaking of exercise, most people know that 150 minutes of exercise is basically the bare minimum for a week. And it's really divided out more into 150 to 300 of moderate, intense exercise, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous exercise. And of course, if you do an exercise history, people will say, I walk most days. And then if you ask them a little bit more detail, then it's maybe 3 days or 2 days. And if you ask them how fast they walk, I think I walk, or they're not even sure how far they walk because they may not measure. A lot of my people don't use their smartwatches to look and actually use the GPS to see how far they've walked. So they think they walk about this far, which sometimes it's not really, or they walk about this fast, but it's not really. So they don't know what their heart rate is. So we don't really know if they're exercising moderately or moderate to vigorous, or certainly vigorous is probably on the lower end of the scale. So most of the time we're happy if we can say, okay, we'd like you to exercise to a moderate type amount of exercise. And when I describe that, if you're walking, you want to push the pace. You want to walk like you don't want to get past. You want to walk like you're going to get somewhere, as opposed to, strolling with your dog, letting your dog sniff, talking to the neighbors. That would not be moderate exercise. So huffing and puffing a little bit, conversational, but knowing that you're doing something, breaking a sweat. If you come back and you live in Florida and you're not sweating, you're not exercising moderately, and you're probably not exercising vigorously. When we talk about vigorously, then we're talking about getting up into that lactate threshold type level, possibly vigorous level, into the anaerobic level, where people's heart rate are, approaching over 85% of their predicted maximal heart rate for periods of time, whether it's interval sessions or, tempo, so sustained efforts for 15 or 20 minutes within backing off. But those are people that are exercising and they're really trying to do some hard workouts. It might be a hard aerobics type class that people are really getting into, and their heart rates are getting up and they're working up a big sweat. That would be more of what I would call vigorous exercise. But conversational pace, just moving right along, then that's probably more moderate. And again, people report these things over the years, and that's what these things are based on. And they're based on how much oxygen consumption that would be. And, the people that do these things have less cardiovascular events than people that don't do anything. So trying to get to that level seems like, okay, this will be the minimal level that I can do, and it's going to help me, and I get it over with. Well, again, now that there are smartwatches and different devices, we can start to look at things a little bit closer. And so there was a study done in the UK looking at the UK Biobank participants, which are basically like our nurses' health study. And they actually looked at people that had a device on, the accelerometer, that really measured their steps and activities. And they looked at not only moderate activity, but they also looked at vigorous activity, and they looked at light activity. And how does that actually correspond to vigorous activity? Because we know that vigorous activity is going to decrease your cardiovascular events. So this moderate and light, how much of that do you actually have to do to make to have a benefit? So again, people come back with, I do about, and so let's look at what that actually means. So it turns out that a minute of vigorous activity is, it's thought of to be like 4 to 9 minutes of moderate activity. Light intensity activity is actually overall 50 to 156 minutes of activity. So they took these patients, and they ended up with 103,000 that were available. They ended up studying 73,485 of those patients, and they looked at all-cause mortality, major cardiac events such as heart attack or stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes events, cancer-related deaths, cancer-related events. The mean age of the population was 61, and they followed them up for 8 years, and they made sure that they had 7 days of wearable data. So it just wasn't intermittent. It's what they did every day. Well, And again, they're looking at vigorous physical activity, moderate physical activity, and light physical activity. And what they came up with was that 1 minute of vigorous activity was about 80 to 90. It took about 80 to 90 minutes, so almost an hour and a half of light activity to equal 1 minute of vigorous activity. It was about, again, 4 to 9 minutes of moderate activity. And that was to decrease cardiovascular events. Previously, it was thought to be like 1 to 2. So 1 minute of vigorous equaled 2 minutes of moderate. And it's not really close when it comes down to it. To decrease diabetes and decrease cholesterol, it takes about 1 minute of vigorous level and 7 minutes of moderate or 13 minutes of light activity. When you look at all-cause mortality, it is about 53 minutes of light activity compared to 1 minute of vigorous activity. Cardiovascular mortality, 73 minutes of light activity for 1 minute of vigorous activity. Cancer mortality, 156 minutes of light activity to equal 1 minute of vigorous activity. So the takeaway is do hard things, and hard things get meaningful results. And I have heard this quote over and over in various ways over the last couple of weeks and in my training for ultras and so forth, but it's been in almost every walk of life that doing hard things is when good things start to happen. And so when we do I went for a walk, took the dog for a walk, or at least I get my mile in, and it's 22 minutes or it's 24 minutes, we're really not moving the dial very much when it comes to overall health and wellness. So you're going to have to push, into at least that moderate activity, or extend the light significantly. So, 156 minutes, that's over, you're approaching 2.5 hours. 120 minutes is 2 hours. So another 30, so 2.5 hours of light activity, to achieve 1 minute of vigorous activity. So your walking is going to have to substantially increase, or whatever activity substantially increase in duration if you don't push the pace a little bit to actually achieve some of these results. And it becomes the approach of, do I have to, or this is what I get when I do this? And so it's a bit of a mindset that, when you do something hard and you're pushing yourself into your uncomfortable zone, then you can't. And the more you do it, the more you can push yourself into these uncomfortable zones or do harder things in all walks of life, in all aspects, because you can. It's a confidence builder. But when you avoid it like the plague and do the bare minimum, you just stay there and you don't grow, and you probably regress. Because we know as we age, we start to lose muscle mass, we lose mitochondrial function. And if we're not maintaining, we're losing. And if there's a little loss, it's basically what we see in people. They lose a little muscle mass every year. And then when they try to do something that they did 4 or 5 years ago, they can't come close, and it's a shocker. And it becomes, what I used to be able to do, and the excuses start down the road of, it's terrible to get old. So what happens? We all get old. We can't, but that's just a number. Age is just a number. It's more of lack of training than it is lack of ability, because we know in groups of individuals where they take people at just about any age, we can make them improve. So, to give it, look around at the Mahjong group of people, or the card playing people that you hang out with, or, the people looking around at a restaurant that you happen to be sitting in, those aren't the people you should be gauging yourselves against, because those people probably aren't healthy either. So if you're just a little healthier than a sick person, you're not that healthy. The idea is to push the envelope a little bit and achieve these things that are a little bit actually meaningful. So, we always tell people when they come to the practice, cardiovascular disease is one of the easiest things to reverse through plant-based nutrition and exercise. You have to put out some effort, but it's actually doable. You can actually stabilize and improve outcomes and improve and get off medications. When people have, when their bodies are so dysfunctional that they start to develop cancers, then that requires even more effort. And the problem is, by the time you get some of these diseases that are making you feel really bad, it is hard to put that effort in. But it has to be done. That work has to be done. So it's easier to practice doing hard things when you feel better than waiting till you get sick to try to have to learn to do those hard things again, because it's going to be much harder. So I don't know if that, is motivating or not, but, the old adage, if you're out running a marathon, and I've been there, lots of times, and, it's like, boy, things are rough out here. I wish I would have done more strength training. I wish I would have done more speed work. So that's just a marathon. That's just something that I get to do for pleasure, or an ultra marathon. I wish I would have done this differently, or I wish I would have done that differently. But if it's your health, that wishing that you were done something differently, you don't have the luxury of, going home, putting your feet up, and then, working out a new plan. You got to be in the race right then and there. And there are no rest days when you're working on trying to come back from a heart attack. You're working from trying to come back from a cancer diagnosis. So you got to keep your head to the grindstone and keep pushing. And the sky's the limit. That's really what we like to tell people is there's no reason, as long as you're on this side of the earth, you can't get better. And we like to support people in doing that. And we like to show people how they can actually do that. And if you've noticed, it's not through a bunch of medications. It's not through a bunch of supplements. It's not through a bunch of procedures. It's hard work on your part. And we love to help people. And we love to watch people succeed and do well. And that's a great reward for you and for me to be able to do that. And since I've changed my practice in 2015, we've helped a lot more people get better than I ever did in the traditional cardiology practice. There weren't people that, got better. We were lucky to keep them the same way. This way, we actually make people better. In closing today, I'm sure most people know Jane Goodall, animal conservationist, wonderful person. She died at 91 here in the last week or so. And she had rules that she lived by, and I wanted to share them with you. She had 10 rules for living. 1, a strong sense of purpose. Obviously, she worked until she was, she passed away, advocating for animals, advocating for a better environment. Number 2, optimism. If you don't think you can do it, you surely can't. And being optimistic is so much better than being negative. Better to be around. But seeing the beauty in things and seeing the good in things is a much better way to live. And I will agree with Jane, is associated much, much more with longevity. Time in nature, hit that one again too. The more you can be outside, hearing the birds, smelling the leaves are changing up north, the better you will be for it. I hope to have a guest in the next couple of weeks that actually healed his lymphoma by actually being out in nature. Walking daily is number 4. We spent a lot of time on that. Walking daily, walking with a purpose daily, walking vigorously like somebody's going to try to pass you or catch you daily. 5, a plant-based diet. Again, I like to reiterate that Jane lived to be 91 years old on a plant-based diet. Not only did Jane live to be 91, but we have a lot of plant-based people that are 91. Dr. Campbell is in his 90s. The Estesons are in their 90s. To me, that is a Blue Zone people in the hundreds. That's pretty good proof that a plant-based diet is a good way to go. There are a lot of different fad diets, but they don't have a lot of people in their ranks that are in their 90s. So to me, that is a good one. 6, cultivating calm. It's easier to be calm than be a worrywart. Worry increases your cortisol level, increases your stress hormones, increases your heart rate, your blood pressure. It does no good, solves nothing. So cultivating calm through meditation, through gratitude, looking at what's going right instead of going wrong. 7, loving animals. Everybody should have an animal. Or go to a place where there is animals. So we have written several prescriptions in my practice for people to go get a new puppy or a new cat. if they've lost an animal or they've never had one. So loving animals, being around animals, show you what true love is. They love unconditionally. They're great teachers for us. Number 8, practice self-care. You got to take care of yourself. It's what it's all about. You have to take care of yourself so you can take care of others. And when you take care of others, there's a sense of purpose, but you have to be okay to take care of others. So take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. Build strong relationships. Nothing more important. We don't live in isolation. We're pack animals. So we live best when we share our experience with others. We like to cultivate a community here in this practice of like-minded individuals, but I've learned so much from my patients and members over time, and I have wonderful memories, and they get to know me and I get to know them. And it's what's made my practice, and it's why I'm still doing it, because of the love of people and building relationships. And certainly family is number one. And being able to enjoy your grandchildren and your children and do things with friends and family is extremely important. And number 10, living simply. We all go through the stage where we accumulate things, and then as we get older, we realize that it's not the things, it's the memories and the time. Time is the most important thing that we have. Time to do to do our purpose, to be with friends and family, to cultivate all these other things. And living simply allows that. You can't take it with you when you go, so you might as well enjoy just living simply, enjoying nature, and a lot less stress and worry. So I hope that those 10 things resonate with you. They certainly resonated with me and made me happy. Thank you, Jane, for living such a life of example and leaving us with some things to think about. So I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I look forward to having a few guests here in the future that I've lined up that I think you might like to hear from. Please go over to our website, drdulaney.com, and check out our practice and what it has to offer. It's DOCTORDULANEY.com. You can email me at Jami, Jami, at drdulaney.com and answer any questions. If you would like us to teach you how to become plant-based in a short course, we would love to work with you. So please, if you have interest in taking control of your health, getting off medications, learning to live these 10 things, give us a call. We'd love to help you. Thanks always for listening. Give us a share with your friends, share the podcast, and thank you very much.